Quote, on or about March 6th, 2016, the plaintiff, Eric Linder, checked in as a resort guest. He was assigned a guest room in the Jack Nicholas Villa building. The plaintiff awoke to discover that he had multiple welts, lumps, and marks over much of his face, neck, arms, and torso, and complained to the resort management, who had both villa guest rooms tested for bed bugs. The plaintiff was advised by the resort staff and/or management that the guest room in the Jack Nicholas Villa had tested positive for bed bugs. The resort generally, and the Jack Nicholas Villa building in particular, has a history of severe bed bug infestation, going back to at least the beginning of 2016, and the remediation was either not performed or was inadequate. Yet, the resort permitted guests to continue to stay in unsuitable rooms nonetheless. That's according to the complaint filed about this incident. Today, we spoke with a source who confirmed that these are photos of the welts in question. This is the plaintiff from that complaint following his stay at the resort. As you can see, the bites were all over his neck, both sides of his face, all down his arms. Lawyers for the resort later reached an undisclosed settlement with the plaintiff. I think it's fair to say he will not be returning to that particular resort anytime soon. But what's the loss, really, when you have world leaders lining up to sleep in the Jack Nicholas Villa in the meantime? Because the resort in question here is the president's struggling golf property in Doral, Florida. Yesterday, the president's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, confirmed to the press that that resort, the president's golf course in Doral, will host next year's G7 summit. And clearly, this is an unprecedented use of the presidency to put revenue into a president's pockets. But what's interesting about this new scandal is that it's also quite clearly a way to prop up a business that has been severely underperforming for the president. The Washington Post's Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter David Fahrenthold has done some remarkable reporting specifically on this Doral property, showing just how steep of a decline the resort is in. And that's no small thing for the president and his business. Doral is where he makes most of his money. It's his keystone property. It's his biggest moneymaker hotel. But in the past few years, the net operating income at that club has dropped by 69%. A tax consultant hired by the club has told officials that it is, quote, severely underperforming. That maybe explains why the property has been recently not all that discerning when it comes to the type of events that it has looked to host. Back in July of this year, you might remember the resort teaming up with a notorious Miami strip club. At that planned event at the president's Doral resort, golfers were given the option to pay for a nude dancer who would then serve as their caddy girl while they shot around at the president's club. The planned itinerary after golfing was to have everybody head back to the strip club for what was described as a, quote, very tasteful burlesque show. One that, however, should be noted, could involve nudity. No promises. We're just saying it could. That strip club event at the president's property was ultimately canceled when the president's family business decided not to go through with it. More recently, though, that's the same property that's been in the news for hosting a pro-Trump conference on a recent weekend. That's the conference in which a video was shown that depicted President Trump shooting and murdering and decapitating and stabbing his political opponents and specific members of the news media. So clearly, the natural progression is to now host the G7 summit of world leaders at that same property. The event is set for June, when business is already very slow at that property. Just to give you an idea, in June of 2017, Doral had a 38% occupancy rate. I guess if they host the G7 there in June, maybe it'll help with that. The White House said today that they vetted 12 possible sites all around America. And what do you know? Doral is just the only one that made sense. Nobody actually knows if a selection process took place at all. Extensive federal reviews have to be done to secure a location for an international summit of this magnitude. There seem to be indications that reviews like that just weren't conducted ahead of this announcement about the G7. Key local officials, like, for example, the mayor of Doral, Florida, say that they only learned about the summit when everybody else did. On Twitter, on TV, the mayor of Doral says he's yet to get a call from the White House about this at all, which would imply that there hasn't been an extensive federal review about the city's planning and security preparations that they would need to be able to promise to carry off an event like this. I mean, there's no shortage of reasons as to why this whole idea is a major problem. My colleague Steve Bennon, who writes at Maddow Blog, I think, has homed in on what may be the biggest issue of all here. Steve writes for us today, quote, "We're watching a passive versus active problem play out. When Saudi Arabia, for example, books rooms at the Trump International Hotel in D.C., and some of the profits from that transaction end up in the U.S. president's pocket, President Trump can defend the arrangement by saying it's entirely passive. He played no role in the Saudis' decision to stay there." That defense, however, disappears with the G7 summit scheme. It's all active corruption, not passive corruption. President Trump, with this deal, in no uncertain terms, is telling some of the world's most powerful leaders that if they wish to participate in next year's international diplomatic summit, they have to spend quite a bit of money at one of his struggling businesses. It's, quote, conscious, it's deliberate, it's direct. Well, the problem with this happening while an impeachment proceeding is already underway is that this does appear to be blatantly unconstitutional, and there is the prospect that this alone might stand as its own article of impeachment in these proceedings. We're going to speak next with the lawmaker who wants Congress to go on the record to vote on why they explicitly don't approve of this move on the part of the president. That's an important thing as to whether or not this is a proven anti-constitutional effort by the president. When something like that happens in the middle of impeachment proceedings, it doesn't tend to end well for the president in question. That's ahead. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.